Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Caitlin and I upload a whole bunch of different types of videos on this channel, mainly surrounding true crime and psychological cases, as well as a little bit of fashion and lifestyle sprinkled in where I can. Now today I'm back with another psychological experiment video. I haven't done one of these in a long time. I'm kind of running out of ideas to do, so if you guys know of any other psychological experiments and things that I can research for you guys, then please let me know. I am definitely running out of things and these are probably my favourite thing to film. Obviously, as you guys know, I've just finished my psychology degree, so this is definitely my area of interest and you guys seem to really love hearing these cases as well. So today I'm going to be discussing ASCH'S conformity study. I've had so many requests to do this one and it's quite a well-known one. Obviously it's quite a core study to consider whenever you are studying psychology, so going to go into that. So if you want to hear a little bit about the study, then keep on watching and we shall just get started. Psychologist Solomon Asch wanted to attempt to investigate just to what extent individuals would conform to the actions or behaviours of a majority group when placed under social pressure. In the year 1951, Asch developed his conformity experiment, which to this day remains one of the most highly cited and kind of underlying experiments for many areas of social psychology. Asch recruited 50 male students as participants from Swarthmore College and advertised basically for their involvement in a vision test. This technically wasn't false, however he was able to use ambiguous wording as a means of preventing the participants' prior judgments or assumptions about the topics or the nature of the experiment from affecting the results that they gave, as this may have occurred if he'd blatantly told them everything that they'd be considered to do. Now the task itself was considered a line judgment task within a lab experiment setting. What was different about this experiment though was that each participant would be placed in a room to complete the task with 7 confederates. So the participants were essentially under the impression that the other men in the room taking part in the experiment with them were all there for the same reason that he was, so they were all there to carry out the experiment, they were all in the same boat. However, this wasn't actually the case and the other 7 men in the room were actually working with the researchers. Prior to the experiment, each of the confederates had agreed upon what their responses were going to be to each of the trials within the experiment. I'll go into a little bit more detail about what they agreed upon later on when it comes to it, but basically they'd already agreed upon what they were going to be answering and this was vital to the experiment. The real participant in each condition, however, did not have this knowledge, and so they were to work through the task as normal while being under the impression that all of the other men in the room were doing the same thing. For every trial, everyone in the room was displayed an image at the same time, and the image showed the target line, which was just a vertical line of a certain length, and then 3 additional lines at the same time labelled A, B and C, and these would all be of different lengths. These 2 images were shown at exactly the same time, so it wasn't a difficult task, and essentially they were asked to, one by one, say out loud which one of the 3 comparison lines matched the target line. And as I'm sure you can tell, this was usually a really obvious task. So the lines, like I'll have shown you on the screen, they were quite obviously matched with the target line. It wasn't difficult, there wasn't like a half a millimetre in it or anything. It was a very obvious answer within every trial, and it was also guaranteed that the real participant in every condition would be the final one in the row to give their answer out loud. And so all 8 men in the room would be saying out loud one by one their response, A, B or C, to the question, and the real participant would be the last one to give their answer, so they would all hear each other's answers. For each participant, there were a total of 18 trials or rounds of the line selection task, and the Confederates purposely gave the incorrect answers to 12 out of the 18 trials. And these 12 trials in which they gave the wrong answers on purpose were known as the critical trials. And the intention was to investigate whether the participants, or the person sat at the end of the line giving out their answer the last, would change their answers to match the incorrect answers given by the rest of the room because the rest of the room had given them, thus conforming to the answers of the majority even if they knew they were wrong. As with most psychological studies, Asch was required to have a control condition in which he can carry out the same experiment pretty much and collect the findings and compare them with the findings of the experimental condition to potentially rule out any external factors that may change any of the answers. And in this case, he carried out the same experiment, the same tasks on participants who were alone. So he didn't have any confederates in the room, he just got their answers to every single trial just to compare with the actual answers. So after each of the 18 trials were carried out for each individual participant, so 50 times of the 18 trials, Asch began to compare the results of each of the trials. And he found that 32%, so just under 1/3 of the participants in the experiment would conform during the critical trials. By this, it was meant that nearly a third of participants would knowingly respond with the incorrect answer just because the majority were doing so. And during the 12 critical trials in which Confederates found themselves purposely giving the incorrect answer, 75% of participants found themselves conforming at least once. And this meant that only a quarter of participants never conformed at any point in the experiment. And when you compare this to the results of the control group, so I have here the control group in which participants didn't find themselves in the room with any Confederates, so no social pressure to conform, less than 1% of participants answered incorrectly, and it seems that this figure is only perhaps due to something else, so maybe an accidental incorrect response or some other explanation. So it's very likely that this was the case and there was virtually no evidence of conformity within the control condition. So all in all, quite a lot of people conformed because they found themselves in a room of people who seemed to be answering the same thing, but that was different to what they felt. And so there was a set of interviews after the experiment, after the debrief and everything, where participants were basically asked how they felt during the experiment, what their thoughts were, and also why they found themselves conforming, whether they were aware of it, whether it was an active choice, and why. The majority of them said that they didn't actually believe in their answers that they were responding. So whenever they gave an incorrect answer because all of the men before them had given that answer, they didn't actually believe that it was the right answer, but they all said that they did so because they either didn't want to stand out, they basically knew that they were conforming with the majority, they didn't want to stand out, they didn't want to make fun of them, so the majority said that this was their reasoning. However, there were a few participants who said that they gave the incorrect answer because they actually believed it was the correct answer. They believed that the other men in the room, because they were the majority and they were all answering the same thing, they genuinely doubted their own beliefs, and they said that they went with it because they thought the men knew something that they didn't, they were answering correctly and they were in the wrong. So these findings bring up the discussion of two types of social influence, which are normative and informational influence. The normative influence is the term given when referring to people who conform because they want to fit in with the group, they want to fit in with the majority, and so they change their views actively to fit in. Whereas informational influence is referring to when people conform because they actually believe that the majority, the rest of the group, know something more than they do. They believe that the others are correct. They genuinely change their own beliefs because they think they are wrong. And this, to this day, if you at any point study psychology, I'm sure you will cover this in social psychology in particular. Normative and informational influence are hugely discussed and still referred to this day, as well as ASCH'S conformity study. It's an absolutely huge study, but it doesn't come without its limitations. It is worth noting how biased the sample was because they were an all-male participant sample as well as being all students, so they were all from the same age group. And this is an issue because obviously it's very hard to generalise the findings of those results. You can't necessarily say that the results found in this experiment would be found the same for all age groups, all genders, because they weren't tested. As well as this, the line task in the artificial lab experiment doesn't necessarily fit with a day-to-day realistic task that people might face. So we can't assume that the findings from this study would also be found within a group of people in day-to-day life. And some people have also made their opinions known that in all likelihood the level of conformity reflects the actual societal development at the time of the experiment carrying out. So the experiment was carried out in 1950s America, in which there was a lot of conformity in general in wider society, a lot of views were shared, and if you were kind of skewed, if you found yourself sharing an unorthodox view or something, you were likely to be met in a very negative manner from other people. It was typical to conform and share views. You wanted to be in the majority. And so some people have said that in all likelihood it was kind of just more of a reflection of wider society, how people were expected to conform at that time. And this view was also supported when other psychologists, there was quite a few, but namely one of the biggest ones was Perrin and Spencer. They carried out some sort of similar conformity tasks following this in like the 1970s and the 1980s, and they found much lower rates of conformity. And people believe that this maybe reflects how, as time passed, it became more and more acceptable to skew away from the conformed, to skew away from the majority, to stick to your views. So that is an interesting consideration. Asch also went on to investigate other external factors that may have perhaps influenced the rate of conformity within his study. So there were loads of things that he did. He did loads of follow-up experiments, including the difficulty of the task, as well as providing the responses in private as opposed to in an open room full of Confederates. So if you want me to do like a follow-up video, maybe discussing some of those follow-up experiments that he did, there's quite a few with some quite interesting findings, and let me know. I won't chuck them all into this video because they're all separate studies in themselves, but if you want me to do a follow-up video like an ASCH'S studies part 2, then let me know. I'm happy to do that for you. But this is where I'm going to end today's video. So this definitely wasn't the most controversial psychological study that I've ever covered. Obviously, it's just interesting because it was done in the 1950s and it is still supported and referred to this day. It's just fascinating. There are a lot of interesting discussion points to consider and everything. So yeah, I thought it was worth mentioning, and a lot of you guys wanted to see this video. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you found this interesting. If there are any other psychological cases, then please let me know. Like I said, I'm seriously running out of psychological cases to cover. I'm sure there are loads more out there that I'm just not even aware of. So if you guys have any, then please feel free to leave them down below or DM me on any of my social media, as well as any other true crime cases. If there are any solved, unsolved, pretty much anything, serial killers, anything, leave them down below, as well as any other regular videos you'd like me to film. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this interesting, and I'll see you guys soon for another video. Thanks for watching. Bye.